Today we're visiting one of my favorite places, airports. They're usually the gateway to a great vacation, but for the people in today's video, the airport became their final destination. From a man crushed beneath an aircraft's landing gear to a man who walked out of an airplane for a video and met a devastating end. It was April 12th, 2017. The night was quiet at an airport in Hungary. Bright lights covered the runway while workers moved around the aircraft, getting everything ready before the flight. Alaric Fenwick was 25 years old and worked as a cafe representative. He was broke and owed money to loan sharks after losing everything through gambling. He started gambling when he was 23 after winning a large amount of money. He spent it without thinking. When it was gone, he borrowed more money to try to win everything back. Instead, the debts became bigger every week. His wages were never enough to pay what he owed. The people he borrowed from kept asking for their money. A friend later introduced him to more loan sharks, but the new loans only made the problem worse. When he realized there was no way to pay everyone back, he decided to run away from the country instead of facing them. I think about debt the way most people don't want to think about it, as a living thing that grows while you sleep. Alaric watched it multiply. Instead of finding help, he decided running would solve it. Late that night, he went to the airport without buying a ticket. He stayed away from the main entrance and walked around the outside until he found a weak place in the airport fence. After climbing through, he kept low and moved across the dark service area, stopping several times whenever he saw airport vehicles or workers nearby. After several minutes, he reached a passenger aircraft that was in the final stages of departure. Ground crews were busy finishing their work around the aircraft, allowing Alaric to slip beneath the front landing gear without immediately drawing attention. He stayed beneath the front of the aircraft where he was hard to see from the normal view of nearby ground workers. Alaric then found the perfect hiding place. He crawled under the front of the aircraft and squeezed himself into the small space beside the nose landing gear. The area was never made for a person. He held onto parts of the landing gear and kept his body as close as possible to avoid being seen from outside. I want to say something to anyone who has ever thought about hiding in an aircraft. Every part of an aircraft exterior is designed for extreme mechanical movement and will not distinguish between cargo and a human body. It's not a hiding place. As the aircraft slowly pulled away from the parking stand, the nose landing gear rolled over the concrete and the steering system began turning to follow the taxiway. The shock strut compressed and expanded under the weight of the aircraft while thick metal arms and braces shifted with every movement. Alaric had positioned himself with both legs between these moving parts. What I find unbearable about this is the moment before the mechanism started moving. He could see the metal around him, but he did not move. Because running from loan sharks felt safer than facing them, and a cramped space under an aircraft felt better than the street. Then the mechanism started moving almost at once, and the narrowing gap closed around his legs with overwhelming force, pinning them tightly between the heavy metal components. As the aircraft kept rolling, the landing gear moved with each small turn and bump, pulling him farther into the assembly, crushing both legs, shattering bone, and tearing muscle and blood vessels. Trapped inside, he could not pull himself free as the aircraft continued taxiing toward the runway. A ground worker noticed something unusual near the front landing gear before the aircraft reached the runway and signaled for the pilots to stop at once. The pilots shut down the engines while emergency crews rushed to the scene. They found Alaric trapped inside the nose landing gear with fatal crush injuries. He was pronounced dead at the airport. The passengers remained inside the aircraft while police secured the area, and the flight was delayed for several hours. Airport investigators reviewed security camera footage and confirmed that Alaric had entered the restricted area alone before hiding inside the aircraft's nose landing gear. They concluded that the fatal injuries occurred during taxi as the landing gear's moving components trapped and crushed his legs. Following the incident, the airport reviewed its perimeter security and fence access to help prevent unauthorized people from entering restricted areas in the future. Alaric died trying to escape debt by hiding under an aircraft. The next person I'm going to tell you about died trying to jump out of one. It was June 9th, 2022, and the afternoon was clear over the coast of Florida near a small recreational airfield. The sky was bright and blue, the ocean was calm with gentle waves, and a stunt was all it took. Cassian Voss was 29 years old and worked in a factory before becoming a full-time content creator online. He started recording stunt videos a few years earlier and built a small audience. As his following grew, he attempted more difficult stunts to attract more viewers. His popularity increased after several videos gained online attention, allowing him to leave the factory job and focus on content creation. Over time, Cassian became known for creating videos with bigger risks and extreme activities. He and his friends recorded jumps, climbs, and dangerous challenges for social media. As he searched for new ideas, some stunts became more difficult. However, some challenges involved serious risks that were not properly assessed before being attempted. I want to be direct here because I think about people like Cassian constantly. The algorithm rewards escalation. It feeds you engagement when you do something dangerous, and it starves you when you repeat what worked before. In the days leading up to the flight, Cassian planned what he described as one of his biggest and most dramatic stunts yet. He wanted to record himself leaving a small single-engine aircraft with a passenger door and falling into the ocean, while a drone captured the entire event from multiple angles below and above. He told the pilot he wanted to film a dramatic exit from the aircraft, but the pilot did not fully understand that Cassian intended to leave the aircraft without any proper safety equipment. Cassian had experience performing stunts for videos, but did not have professional skydiving training or experience with controlled aerial jumps from aircraft. No proper safety assessment was completed before the stunt, and no detailed emergency plan was created for what could go wrong. Cassian did not use equipment designed for jumping from an aircraft, such as a parachute or protective gear. A drone operator positioned a boat below the planned flight path to record the stunt from the water. I can say that Cassian heard the warnings ringing all around him and decided his followers were more important than his life. Before the jump, the aircraft climbed to around 500 feet above the ocean. At that height, Cassian had only about 5 to 6 seconds before reaching the water. Before the aircraft reached the planned location, the pilot repeatedly warned Cassian not to leave the aircraft without proper equipment and told him the stunt would not go ahead. As the pilot began turning the aircraft away to abandon the plan, Cassian suddenly opened the door and exited before the pilot could stop him. At first, the fall appeared controlled from below, but because the aircraft was flying at such a low altitude, there was almost no time for anyone, even an experienced skydiver with a parachute, to fully stabilize before reaching the water. Cassian's lack of training and equipment made the situation far more dangerous. He entered the water at high speed and suffered severe injuries from the impact. The force and angle of entry caused damage that left him unable to survive. The drone operator managed to keep Cassian's approximate location in view and used the footage to guide the boat toward him. Because the boat was already nearby for filming, the crew reached Cassian shortly after the impact and immediately began providing emergency assistance before official responders arrived at the location. The pilot turned the aircraft around and contacted emergency services with the exact location. Emergency responders arrived and transported Cassian to a hospital. Doctors treated him for multiple traumatic injuries, including severe head and internal injuries caused by the high-speed impact with the water, but the damage was too extensive, and Cassian was pronounced dead at the hospital. Investigators reviewed the drone footage, flight information, and statements from everyone involved in the planning. They concluded the accident resulted from an attempted aircraft exit without proper training, equipment, or safety planning. Officials explained that striking the water at high speed from that altitude can generate forces similar to hitting a solid surface, causing catastrophic traumatic injuries, especially without proper equipment or a controlled entry. Cassian died for a video that millions of people will see exactly once. The next two people died for a trip that was supposed to matter more than anything, an anniversary. It was May 10th, 2014, and the mountain airfield was quiet in Western Australia. It was morning, and few workers were getting the planes ready. Gerald Trevelyan was 30 years old and worked at a shopping mall as a manager. Yolanda was 25 and did hair at a salon in town. They got together in high school and married 2 years after that, and they did pretty much everything together because they really loved each other. Their third anniversary was coming up, and they wanted to fly to a small island to celebrate, but money was tight, so they could not pay for a real pilot or rent a plane the normal way. I think about couples who decide to do risky things together that seem like it will save them money. The issue most of them have is that they don't think it through. Gerald had a friend who owned a private Cessna 172 airplane and sometimes took him on short flights around the mountains. Every time they flew, Gerald watched his friend handle the controls and listened to him explain what each thing did. He never took any real flight training, but he figured that just watching someone fly an airplane enough times meant he could probably do it himself. It seemed simple enough from the passenger seat. When Gerald asked his friend to fly them out to the island for their anniversary, the friend said no. He told Gerald that flying needed real planning and permission papers and insurance, and he warned him that piloting an airplane was way harder than it looked from the side. He was serious about it and said Gerald should not try this. I think you need to hear this. When someone who knows how to do something tells you that you cannot do it without training, they are not trying to diminish you. They are trying to keep you alive. Gerald decided to take the plane anyway, without asking or telling anyone. The airfield sat up on a high mountain plateau with steep rocky hills all around it. On one side of the runway, the land just dropped hard into a valley full of rocks and boulders, which meant there was basically no room for mistakes once the plane went up in the air. The security at this small private airfield was not very tight. The plane was locked, but Gerald knew exactly where his friend kept the keys because he had been there so many times before. He went early in the morning before his friend woke up and took the keys without telling anybody. He and Yolanda drove out to the airfield, got into the plane, and got ready to take off before anyone could reach them. His friend woke up and noticed the keys were gone, and right away he knew Gerald had taken them. He called the workers at the airfield and drove over quickly, but it was already too late because the plane was already moving. Gerald tried to start the engine a couple times before it actually turned over. The workers at the airfield saw that there was no flight plan for any plane taking off, so they called emergency services and tried to radio the plane, but Gerald did not respond because he did not know how to use the radio correctly. He pushed the throttle forward and moved the plane onto the runway real fast. He did not do any of the checks he was supposed to do, and he ignored the wind that was coming from the side. The plane started going faster down the runway, and he just focused on keeping it straight. The nose came up and it lifted off the ground, but it went up all crooked. A big gust of wind hit the plane and pushed it sideways. Gerald moved the controls too suddenly and pulled back far too hard. The nose went up really steep. The airplane started going slow. It entered a stall and dropped right back down only seconds after it got in the air. Gerald had no training, so he could not fix what was happening. The plane rolled over to the left and started falling fast toward the ground. There was not enough time for him to do anything before it hit the rocky slope beyond the runway. The left wing crashed into the rocks with a huge impact that tore the whole wing apart. The plane smashed into the rocks and boulders with pieces flying everywhere. The sound was loud, and it happened so fast. Emergency crews got there as fast as they could, but the ground was rough and hard to get to. They found the plane all torn up and destroyed. Gerald and Yolanda both died from the injuries, and they got pronounced dead right there at the crash site. Investigators examined the aircraft and found no mechanical problems that could have caused the crash. They ruled the incident an accidental death caused by pilot error after an unauthorized flight. Friends later said Gerald had always dreamed of flying, but never took the time to earn a pilot's license, while Yolanda had trusted him to get them to their anniversary destination safely. Gerald and Yolanda died trying to save money on an anniversary flight. The next person died on a flight that she actually paid for. It was August 21st, 2013, and the evening was calm as a passenger plane flew toward Singapore. The cabin lights were on, most passengers were seated, and the flight had been routine for several hours. Isolde Thackeray was 33 years old and worked at a laundry store. She had never married and often told people she was not looking for a relationship. After her mother died when she was a child, her father raised her and her younger sister alone. As the years passed, Isolde and her father argued more often, mostly over money and old grudges, and eventually stopped speaking to each other altogether. When he died, she flew home expecting to receive a large share of his property. Instead, the will left everything to her younger sister. The decision ended the plan she had built her future around. Before her return flight, Isolde spent hours drinking at the airport bar. She was already intoxicated before boarding and had a small bottle of tequila with her, which she quietly mixed with the drinks served during the flight. I think about anger that has nowhere to go except inward. She lost it all, and she thought the answer was tequila. I've been there. As the flight continued, Isolde became louder and ignored repeated requests from the cabin crew to remain seated. She argued with the crew several times, and other passengers began looking toward her row. 2 flight attendants stayed nearby to keep an eye on her, while the rest of the cabin remained calm. A short time later, Isolde stood up and told a flight attendant she needed the toilet. Instead of walking toward the toilets, she suddenly turned and grabbed the handle of an emergency exit door. She pulled on it several times with both hands, trying repeatedly to force it open. Because the aircraft was fully pressurized and flying at cruising altitude, the exit could not open, despite her pulling with all her strength. The sudden movement alarmed nearby passengers, and a few people rushed forward to help the cabin crew. The cabin crew rushed toward Isolde as soon as she pulled the handle. One flight attendant grabbed her right arm, while another held her from behind to stop her from reaching for it again. Isolde pulled against them and tried to reach the door once more, forcing the crew to drag her backward into the aisle. Several nearby passengers quickly stood up and helped hold her arms before she could break free. As they struggled, Isolde lost her footing and stumbled forcefully into the row beside the exit, striking the side of her head against the armrest before her head hit the edge of another seat as she collapsed into the narrow gap between them. Other passengers trying to help were knocked into each other, leaving several with minor cuts and bruises. The emergency exit could not open. It was physically impossible, but the plastic armrest was always going to be there. The cabin crew restrained Isolde with the help of able-bodied passengers and moved her away from the exit. She was breathing, but had suffered a serious head injury during the fall. The captain declared an emergency and diverted the aircraft to the nearest airport, where paramedics and an ambulance were waiting for the aircraft after it landed. Isolde was taken to hospital immediately after landing. Doctors treated her for a severe head injury and bleeding inside her skull, but despite emergency surgery, she died several hours later. The passengers hurt during the struggle were treated for minor injuries and later released. Investigators interviewed the cabin crew, passengers, and flight crew and reviewed the aircraft's flight data and cabin reports afterward. They confirmed the emergency exit had never opened because the aircraft was pressurized in flight and such doors physically cannot be forced at altitude. The investigation concluded that alcohol had significantly impaired Isolde's judgment and contributed to the incident. After her death, her family said they hoped others would learn from what happened and never underestimate how severely alcohol can affect a person's decisions. Isolde died because she tried to open a door that could never open. The next person died because he tried to explore a part of an airport that was never meant for passengers. It was June 16th, 2016, and the morning was busy at an older airport terminal in North Carolina that was undergoing renovations. Travelers moved through the building while workers prepared for another day of flights. The terminal was still operating, but parts of it were being repaired and changed. Torsten Blackwell was 36 years old and worked as a janitor at a school. His job involved cleaning classrooms, taking care of different areas of the building, and making sure everything stayed in good condition. Because he worked around buildings every day, he understood how they were usually arranged and often noticed things other people ignored. Outside of work, Torsten was a father of 2 children. He had planned a trip to visit them and had arranged his schedule so he could make the journey. He did not travel often, but he had prepared for the trip and left home with enough time to reach the airport. However, traffic became heavier than expected and slowed him down. By the time he arrived at the terminal, his flight had already left. Torsten went to the airline desk to ask what he could do. The staff checked the options available but told him there were no immediate flights that would get him where he needed to go. After hearing this, he stepped away from the counter and began walking around the terminal trying to decide his next move. I want to pause here because missing a flight to see your children is genuinely frustrating. But that, however, is not enough to make what comes next acceptable. While walking, Torsten noticed an area where renovation work was taking place. The older terminal was being repaired, and workers were using certain doors to move tools and equipment between areas. Because workers were regularly passing through, the doors were sometimes left open while construction continued. The opening was not meant for passengers. Warning signs were placed nearby, and a temporary barrier separated the construction area from the public walkway. The signs made it clear that only workers were allowed beyond that point. However, Torsten saw the opening and became curious about what was inside. Instead of staying in the passenger area, he walked past the barrier and entered the restricted section. Inside, the area was unfinished and looked very different from the rest of the terminal. Construction materials, tools, and equipment were scattered around while workers continued repairs. Torsten continued walking until he found stairs leading to a higher level where maintenance equipment was kept. A sign near the stairs warned that the area was only for authorized workers, but Torsten still went up. At the top, he reached a platform above the main terminal. The area was still part of the construction zone, with unfinished sections and equipment nearby. During the repairs, workers had removed part of the safety railing so they could access another section of the platform. This left an open gap along the edge, with a drop of about 40 feet to the terminal floor below. Torsten walked across the platform and moved closer to the edge. When he stepped near the opening, his foot landed on an unsafe section with no proper support. His balance shifted, and he tried to catch himself, but there was no railing or nearby object to grab. He fell forward through the gap and dropped around 40 feet toward the floor. When you cannot see a danger, you cannot prepare for it. But Torsten could see the signs. He chose to walk past them anyway, and the 40-foot drop was always waiting on the other side. The fall happened quickly. Torsten struck parts of the structure before hitting the hard surface below. A worker nearby heard the impact and ran over to see what happened. Emergency services were called and the area was secured while responders arrived. However, Torsten's injuries were too severe, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. After the accident, airport officials reviewed security footage, spoke with workers, and examined the renovation area. They found that Torsten had entered a restricted section after passing warning signs and a temporary barrier. Officials also reviewed the safety procedures used during construction and checked how temporary openings were being controlled to prevent passengers from entering dangerous areas in the future. Torsten died after wandering into a restricted construction area out of curiosity. The last person I'm going to tell you about died because he forgot to take out an earbud. It was June 18th, 2020, and rain covered a small regional airport in Tasmania, Australia. The airport was quiet except for workers getting aircraft ready and moving equipment around the wet airfield during the night shift. Gerard Weatherall was 24 years old and had only been working at the airport for 2 months. He was a ground handling trainee who helped with basic airport tasks and did what the ground crew told him to do. He was still learning airport ramp procedures and had not finished all of his training yet. Before getting this job, Jera had spent years trying to build a stable life after his family had money problems. He worked different small jobs before finally getting a chance at the airport. He wanted to keep this job because it gave him steady money, and he could help his younger sister, who was still in school. At the airport, Jera became known because he liked dancing whenever he had time. During breaks, he would play music and entertain other workers sometimes. He also liked wearing earphones during his breaks. A couple of times, he forgot to take one earbud out before going back to work, even though airport rules said workers could not wear earphones while working on the ramp. Some coworkers told him to remove it completely and pay attention to what was happening around him, especially when aircraft were moving near him. I have watched young people who are trying to build a life and get stable work, and they often feel like they need to prove they belong. So they take shortcuts with safety rules. They think one bend in the rules will not matter, but it does. That night, Jera was working extra because another employee did not show up. The weather was bad, and the rain made it hard to see across the airfield. After finishing some tasks, he kept helping the ground crew while an aircraft was coming in. Because he was still learning, he watched what the experienced workers did and tried to do his assigned tasks right. A small twin-engine propeller aircraft landed on the wet runway and moved slowly toward the parking area. Jera was standing in the marked safe area with the other ground crew. After the aircraft stopped, he walked forward to check equipment near the aircraft. He crossed past the marked safe area before anyone close by saw him doing it. The aircraft propellers were spinning so fast they were hard to see clearly. The left engine had been turned off, but the right engine was still running while the pilot was still finishing the engine shutdown. Jera saw that the left propeller had stopped. Because of the rain and engine noise and the single earbud he forgot to take out after his break, he did not hear the warnings. One of his coworkers saw him walking closer to the aircraft and immediately waved his arms and ran toward him. The worker only noticed him after he crossed the marked safety area because the rain and engine noise made it difficult to see what he was doing. Other workers also recognized the danger and rushed toward Jera, trying to stop him before he reached the aircraft. I need to be direct. A spinning propeller kills anything it touches, the way water drowns anything that enters it. There is no compromise. There is no second chance. Before anyone could reach him, Jarrah stepped right into the path of the spinning propeller. The propeller blade struck him with massive force, causing severe trauma to his upper body and head, and he was killed instantly. The workers called emergency services right away. Medical teams arrived at the airport and looked at him at the scene, but he was already dead from his injuries, so they could not save him. After the incident happened, airport officials looked at what happened and reminded workers about the dangers of moving aircraft. The investigation found that many things caused the accident, including Jarrah wrongly thinking the aircraft was fully shut down and entering an unsafe area, and bad supervision and communication during aircraft shutdown. New safety rules were given about staying away from propellers and staying in marked safe areas and waiting for clear instructions before going near aircraft, and not wearing anything that could stop communication while working near operating aircraft. Jarrah died after entering the path of a spinning propeller, while several safety failures came together, including missing the warnings around him. He had been told to stay clear until the aircraft was safe to approach. His co-workers tried to warn him, but by then it was already too late.